Part 1. The Arrival. Staff Sergeant Vance Caldwell snatched the new arrival's rifle case and let it drop straight into the mud. It was entirely deliberate. Pivoting back to his crew, he let out a harsh laugh. "Look what headquarters sent us for Christmas," he sneered, projecting his voice so the entire barracks could hear. "A girl with a scope." The woman offered no reply. She simply crouched, retrieved her case, methodically checked the rifle inside, and walked away. That silence, an absolute, terrifyingly cold silence, was the very first indicator that every single man standing there had just made the gravest mistake of their lives. Narrator's note: if stories of raw, undeniable courage move you, please subscribe to this channel. Follow this journey to its conclusion, and drop a comment below with the city you are watching from to let us see how far this tale travels. The moment Sergeant Sloane Callahan stepped off the transport helicopter, the cold struck her. This wasn't the biting, familiar chill of high desert nights back in Arizona, where she had grown up watching her father polish his rifle on the porch as the sun dipped behind Red Canyon walls. This was entirely different. This was the brutal, suffocating grip of an eastern Afghanistan mountain winter. It was the kind of cold that held zero interest in human frailty, possessed no patience for complaints, and offered absolutely no mercy to the unprepared. It pressed against her face like a physical hand crawling through her jacket, as if invited. Adjusting the strap of her rifle case, Sloane surveyed her surroundings. Bravo Company's forward operating base sat wedged between two steep ridge lines, a cluster of concrete barriers, sandbags, camouflage netting, and prefabricated shelters that looked as though they had been dropped from a great height and simply left where they landed. The mountains rose on all sides, enormous and indifferent, their upper faces lost in low clouds and blowing snow. Somewhere up there, in the gray, there was nothing above the tree line. The wind made a sound like someone breathing slowly through clenched teeth. Sloane had been in worse places. Over her years of dedicated service, she had learned one iron truth about arriving somewhere new in the military. The opening moments told you everything you needed to know about the men you were going to be working with. So she watched. A group of Marines stood near the motor pool, technically doing maintenance work, but actually watching her. She counted 7 of them. She noted the way they held themselves, shoulders back, chins up, that particular posture men use when they want to appear relaxed while they are absolutely not. She noted the glances they exchanged. She noted the smiles. And she noted the man in the middle. Staff Sergeant Vance Caldwell was not an unusual man, which was precisely what made him dangerous. Broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had been handsome once and was now something distinctly harder, he had multiple combat deployments behind him. He wore that fact the way some men wear a heavy coat conspicuously, always making sure everyone nearby could feel the weight of it. He was the kind of man who had decided, somewhere along the way, that experience gave him the divine right to judge everyone who had less of it. He walked toward her, and not to help. Anyone who had ever been in a room with Vance Caldwell for more than a passing moment understood the difference between when he walked toward something because he wanted to help and when he walked toward something because he wanted an audience. He stopped a few paces in front of her. "Callahan," he said, reading her name tape as if it were a punchline he had just figured out. "Sloane Callahan." "That's right," she said. "They told us we were getting a new sniper." He looked her over the way a man looks at a car he has already decided not to buy. "Didn't tell us it was going to be a..." He paused, making a small, dismissive gesture with his hand that covered everything from her boots to her face. At this, the men by the motor pool laughed. Sloane said nothing. She had learned over the years that silence in these moments was not weakness. Silence was information. When you stayed quiet and let a man talk, you learned everything about him.
his insecurities, his fears, the exact size and shape of the hole in himself that he was trying to fill with someone else's humiliation. Vance Caldwell, she could already tell, had a very large hole.
"I need to find Captain Thorne," she said evenly. "Can you point me in the right direction?" Caldwell studied her, trying to figure out whether her calm was genuine or performed, whether she was hiding something, or whether she simply genuinely did not care about his opinion. He had not encountered the second option very often. "Thorne's in the command post," he finally said, pointing toward a low concrete building at the far end of the base. "But you might want to settle in first. Long walk for someone carrying all that." He shot another pointed look at her rifle case. "I'll manage," she replied, and walked away. Behind her, she heard Caldwell say something to the men by the motor pool. She did not hear the exact words, but she heard the laughter that followed, and one phrase that carried clearly through the thin mountain air. "Snow Princess." She kept walking. Part 2. The Command Post. Inside the command post, Captain Elias Thorne was bent over a map table, marking positions with a grease pencil. He looked up when she entered, wearing the specific expression of a man who had been doing this job long enough to be permanently, professionally tired. Dark hair gone gray at the temples, his eyes had seen enough to make them deeply careful. He stood up when she entered, an automatic reflex of a man raised to stand when someone new came into a room, regardless of rank or gender, and held out his hand. "Sergeant Callahan, Elias Thorne." "Sir, heard good things." He said it simply, without the tone men sometimes used when they meant the exact opposite. "How was the flight?" "Cold." He almost smiled. "Gets worse. Sit down." She sat. He turned back to the map and began talking through the tactical situation, in the language she had grown up speaking. Grid coordinates, elevation profiles, likely enemy positions, fields of fire, choke points, escape routes. She listened intently and asked 3 questions. Each question, she could see, surprised him slightly. Not because they were impressive questions, but because they were precise ones. The kind of questions that revealed a specific, deep understanding of the terrain and the threat. By the time he finished the briefing, something had shifted in his eyes. Not much, but something. "I'll get Corporal Hayes to show you the base layout," Thorne said, "and your quarters. I can find it." "He'll show you," Thorne replied softly. It was not a suggestion. "Hayes is one of the good ones. Pay attention to what he says about the men. He's been here a while. He knows things that don't appear on paper." Corporal Declan Hayes was a young man who looked even younger than his age. It was the kind of youth that made senior enlisted men sigh, not because they disliked him, but because looking at him reminded them of how much they had aged. He had red hair, freckles, and the build of an athlete who had been reshaped by military service into something leaner and harder. He was waiting outside the command post when Sloane emerged. "Sergeant Callahan," he greeted. "I'm Hayes." "I know," she said. "Captain told me." He fell into step beside her, positioning himself slightly to her left. That told her he had done this before, escorting new personnel, orienting them to the layout. He pointed out the key buildings, the latrine schedule, the generator noise patterns that would interfere with radio communication, and the blind spot in the eastern barrier wall where the sentry rotation had a brief gap. She filed all of it away. "Can I ask you something?" he asked after walking together for a stretch. "You're going to regardless," she replied. He paused, then let out a quick, surprised laugh. "Fair enough. How long have you been a sniper?" "Years." He glanced at her sideways, doing the mental math. He said nothing for a moment, because the math told a complicated story about someone who had started very young and kept going without ever stopping. "The guys are going to be rough on you," he finally said. "Not all of them, but some of them. Caldwell, especially. I noticed. I just want you to know." He stopped, reconsidered, and started again. I want you to know that not everyone here is like that." Sloane looked at him. He was staring straight ahead, his jaw slightly tight, the look of someone who wanted to say more, but was working out whether it was his place. "I know," she said quietly. "Captain Thorne isn't, and you're not." "How can you tell? We just met." "Because you're walking on my left." He blinked. "What?" "When you walk on someone's left, you're positioning yourself to shield them from potential contact on the dominant threat axis. It's a protective instinct. You do it automatically, which means you actually mean it. People who want to appear protective do it consciously, and they always get the side wrong." Declan stared at her for a prolonged moment. "That is either the most impressive thing anyone has ever said to me," he murmured, "or the most unsettling." "Probably both," she said. That first night, Sloane did not sleep. Not because she was anxious, and not because the cold or the unfamiliar rhythm of a new base kept her awake. She had slept in far worse places, places where sleeping meant trusting that the other 3 people in her team were doing their jobs. She had learned to sleep with that kind of trust, the way city dwellers learn to sleep through traffic noise. She didn't sleep because she had work to do. Pulling out her field notebook, a battered, water-stained thing that had been with her through multiple deployments, she began writing. Elevation data from the maps, wind pattern observations she had made during the day, behavioral patterns of the men she had watched, potential position sites for overwatch if the company was required to operate in the valley below. She was still writing in the dead of night when she heard the crunch of boots outside. She waited. The sound stopped just outside her door. "You're awake," a voice said, not a question. She recognized it. "Hayes, guard rotation," she asked through the door. "Couldn't sleep. I saw your light. I don't need company." "I know." A pause. "Can I ask you something else?" She set her pen down. "One question. Why did you come to this unit? You could have requested assignment anywhere. Someone with your record? Thorne said it was classified but impressive. You could have gotten a cushy posting, a training role stateside." Sloane looked at the wall. She thought about her father. She thought about the photograph she carried in the inside pocket of her jacket. A photograph of him in his dress uniform, serious-faced and proud. She thought about the classified file she had read years ago, the file that had shifted the entire trajectory of her life without her ever being able to tell anyone why or how. "Go get some sleep, Hayes," she instructed softly. A long pause. "Yes, Sergeant," he replied, and she heard his boots crunch away into the cold. She picked up her pen and kept writing. Part 3. The Range and the Revelation. The following morning, Caldwell escalated. It started at breakfast in the way these things always do, casually, with plausible deniability in a setting where witnesses could tell themselves they hadn't really seen what they saw. Sloane sat at the far end of the table methodically eating her meal while mentally reviewing her notes from the previous night. She was aware of Caldwell settling into a seat nearby with 2 of his people, a lance corporal named Adler and a sergeant named Mercer. Both carried Caldwell's energy the way certain dogs mirror the temperament of the owner who raised them. "So I looked you up," Caldwell announced to the air in front of him, not looking directly at her. It was the technique of a man who had learned how to push without leaving fingerprints. "Found your last unit, scout sniper team out of Camp Pendleton. You were on a team of 4. He let the silence breathe. "You're the only one who made it back." The mess hall grew uncomfortably quiet. Sloane kept eating. 3 men, Caldwell continued, all dead. And you're here. Mercer shifted nervously in his seat. Even Adler, who usually tracked Caldwell's tone the way a weather vane tracks wind, looked visibly unsettled. "Remarkable luck," Caldwell sneered. Sloane set her fork down. She turned her head and looked at Caldwell directly. Not with anger, not with hurt, but with the steady, calibrated attention of someone studying a problem they had already solved and we're simply confirming the math. Staff Sergeant Caldwell, she said quietly, I know what you're doing. I know why you're doing it, and I want you to understand something. She locked onto his gaze. I have buried better men than you. I will not let you make that small. The table was completely silent. Caldwell opened his mouth, then closed it. Something flickered behind his eyes, a rapid recalculation. It was the specific kind of surprise a man feels when the thing he poked turns out to have teeth he did not anticipate. He said nothing. Sloane picked up her fork and resumed her meal. At the far end of the table, Declan Hayes watched it all. Later, as the mess hall emptied, he paused beside Sloane's chair. Those 3 men, he said softly. Were they your friends? She didn't look up. They were my teen. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, she told him. Remember them. There's a difference. The training began that afternoon. Captain Thorne had arranged for Sloane to demonstrate her capabilities to the company standard procedure he claimed to calibrate expectations. But Sloane understood what he was actually doing. He was giving her a stage. The range was set up below the eastern ridge line, with targets placed at increasing distances, 300 meters, 500, 700, and 850. The conditions were abysmal. Wind hammered from the northwest, gusting and unpredictable, while the temperature plummeted, driving horizontal sheets of snow across the valley. Most of the company turned out to watch, which was a data point in itself. Marines didn't voluntarily gather in freezing conditions unless they expected a spectacle. They expected her to fail. She could feel it in how they positioned themselves off to the side, ready to watch her face when the shots went wrong. She set up her position without rushing. She had a ritual, and she adhered to it, regardless of the audience, because the ritual was not a performance. It was preparation. Bipod cheek-weld breathing. The deliberate process of becoming part of the landscape, narrowing her entire existence down to the solitary point where the barrel met the frigid air. She fired the first shot at 300 meters, center mass, clean. Polite, unsurprised murmurs rippled through the crowd. She chambered and fired at 500, center mass again. The murmurs shifted tone, still cautious, still waiting. 700 meters. The wind gusted violently just as she fired a hard lateral push that should have thrown the round wildly off target. The round hit center mass. The watching Marines went quiet in an entirely different way. It was the silence of a crowd that had arrived expecting to laugh, only to find themselves utterly unable to. 850 meters. She read the wind for a sustained moment. Not the surface wind on the range, that was irrelevant. She read the wind along the entire flight path. The way it changed at 200 meters shifted again at 500, and danced unpredictably near the target, betrayed only by the movement of the snow. She calculated. She adjusted. She breathed. She fired. The target disappeared. Complete absolute silence draped over the Marines. Then, from somewhere in the back, came a single, slow clap. Then 2 more. Soon it spread, reluctant at first, then genuine, the sound of seasoned men realizing they were witnessing greatness. Caldwell did not clap. Sloane noticed, as she broke down her position, that he had already left. That evening, Declan found her on the eastern berm, staring at the darkening mountains. You could have made that easier on yourself, he noted, standing beside her. Earlier, with Caldwell, you could have ignored him. Let the range work speak for itself. That's exactly what I did. He pondered that. You said something to him at breakfast. I told him the truth. That's not the same as defending myself. She paused. There's a difference between protecting yourself and justifying yourself. I will not justify myself to Vance Caldwell. I don't have the time, and he doesn't have the capacity to understand the answer. Declan stood quietly as the wind pushed thin, paper-like sheets of snow past their boots. "What happened to your team?" he finally asked. "If you can say." She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. "We were operating on intelligence that was wrong," she said. "Not accidentally wrong, deliberately wrong. Someone who knew our route gave it to the wrong people. My teammates paid for that with their lives." Declan absorbed the weight of it. "And you?" "I paid differently." She kept her eyes on the jagged peaks. "I'm still paying." He wanted to ask more, but the rigid line of her shoulders told him the window had closed. "Get some rest, Hayes," she advised. "Something tells me we're not going to have much time for rest soon." He looked at her, alarmed. "Why, you know something." "I know mountains," she said softly. "And these have been too quiet for too long. That's never good." Part 4. The approaching storm. Days bled into one another, and the base's atmosphere shifted. The nickname Snow Princess vanished completely. The mockery was replaced by a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Caldwell operated around Sloane like water flowing around a stone, never acknowledging her, simply redirecting. But a man like Caldwell didn't change. He recalculated. And a calculating man is infinitely more dangerous than an angry one. Declan cornered her in the mess hall over coffee. Caldwell requested a transfer. He murmured, his voice flat, to avoid drawing attention. Sloane wrapped her hands around her mug. "When?" "Yesterday." Thorne denied it. "We're days out from a major operation, and Caldwell is the senior vehicle commander. Thorne couldn't pull him even if he wanted to." "Tell me about the mission." Declan leaned in. "Medical convoy. Critical supplies heading to a village called Karwat, deep in the valley. The road closes soon when the storm hits, rendering it impassable for months. 300 people in that village are relying on this." "And the intelligence on enemy activity?" Declan hesitated just a fraction of a second, but she caught it. "Official assessment says moderate risk. Unofficial assessment. Sergeant Mercer was on patrol through the lower valley weeks prior. He came back and told Caldwell that the valley felt wrong. Too quiet. No local movement, no shepherds, nothing. Mercer said it felt exactly like the build-up to an ambush years ago." Sloane felt a profound shift in her chest. The pieces of the puzzle were finally snapping together. What was Caldwell's reaction? He called Mercer paranoid, said the intelligence was solid, and told him to keep his mouth shut. Sloane immediately stood up. "I need to talk to Thorne." She intercepted Captain Thorne near the vehicle bay. Keeping her voice low and clinical, she detailed her own observations from the berm, the wind patterns, the absence of wildlife, the unnatural stillness. She pointed out 3 specific choke points on the map, where the valley narrowed, creating flawless, elevated crossfire positions. Thorne stared at the map, his face tight with the burden of command. "You're telling me the valley is compromised." "I'm telling you the terrain is begging for an ambush," she corrected. "If I were setting one, those are the exact positions I would use, and I am very good at setting ambushes." Thorne rubbed the back of his neck. "Our only alternative route adds hours. With the weather window closing, it's the difference between saving that village and failing." He looked at her. "You could be wrong." "I could be," she said. "I'm not." Thorne looked away. "I'll review the alternative routes. Thank you, Sergeant." As she turned to leave, he called out softly, "Callahan, don't share this with the unit yet. If Caldwell catches wind—" He stopped himself. "He'll what?" she pressed. Thorne met her eyes. "He'll make sure it gets to the wrong people." Sloane walked back to her quarters and opened her field notebook. She wrote down the facts, the false intelligence, Mercer's silenced report, Thorne's veiled warning. Then she wrote one final line. "Dad, I think I found it." Part 5. The Valley of Shadows. The mission briefing took place at dawn. The room was packed, breath-fogging in the freezing air. Thorne detailed the route to cargo and the contingency plans. He assigned Sloane as the Overwatch lead, meaning she would operate independently of the main convoy from an elevated position. When her name was called, Sloane watched Caldwell. He didn't turn around, but the back of his neck went rigid. He was calculating his next move. Hours before departure, Sloane was back on the berm, studying the northern ridge through her optics. What she saw made her heart hammer against her ribs. The snow pattern had changed overnight. In the exact 3 elevated firing positions she had identified on the map, the snow had melted slightly, the unmistakable thermal signature of human bodies seeking shelter. She rushed to Thorne. "They're there. Northern ridge line. 3 positions confirmed. I need to be on the ridge before the convoy enters the valley. I need a solid head start." Thorne looked at her, the terrible weight of his decision pressing down on him. "We go. The village can't wait. You have your head start. Go." As Sloane geared up in the equipment bay, she overheard Caldwell muttering to Mercer nearby. Filtering the background noise, she caught the chilling fragments of Caldwell's whispered instructions. "Already in position. Keep to the schedule. Just do your job." Stepping out into the pre-dawn darkness, she was intercepted by Declan. He looked pale and utterly terrified. "Callahan," he breathed urgently. "I was running a comm check. I picked up a transmission on an encrypted insurgent channel. It originated from inside the wire, inside our base." Sloane stood completely still. The final piece clicked into place. The betrayal that had killed her father was orchestrated by the very same network currently operating in this valley, facilitated by a man wearing an American uniform. "Listen to me carefully, Hayes," she ordered. "Tell Thorne what you heard, but only when Caldwell is not around. Tell no one else." She looked toward the black looming mountains. "I know what's in that valley. I know who put it there, and I know what I have to do. I have been preparing for this moment for years." Declan stared at her, the realization dawning on his youthful face. "Your father," he whispered. She held his gaze resolute. "Go find Thorne." Part 6. The Impossible Shot. Sloane was mid-climb when the first explosion hit. She felt the concussion through the rock face before the sound wave hit her chest. An RPG had struck the lead vehicle. Below her, the radio erupted into chaos. Thorne's voice cut through the panic, calling for suppression and demanding her status. She didn't stop. A grueling climb brought her to the precarious ledge she had selected. Dropping prone, she deployed her rifle in a matter of seconds. Through her scope, the massacre unfolded below. The convoy was pinned in a brutal, coordinated crossfire. Marines were down. She found the first muzzle flash on the north ridge. She fired. 1 down. She tracked the impact pattern on the second vehicle to locate the south ridge shooter. She fired. 2 down. She found the third position using a dead ground fold and double-tapped the automatic gunner. 3 down. She guided Declan over the radio, using his suppressing fire to flush out the fourth shooter hiding in a rock overhang. 4 down. But the ambush wasn't over. Precise, methodical shots were still picking off Marines. This wasn't an insurgent fighter. This was a highly trained sniper, the anchor of the operation. She pulled back from her scope and analyzed the entire landscape. If she were the enemy commander, where would she be? She found him. He was positioned on the far north face of the mountain, shielded from the valley nearly a kilometer away. "Thorne, 5th position located," she reported over the radio. "Distance is severe. Give me time." The wind was howling, rotating in unpredictable cycles around the rock face. Her hands were numb. Her heart pounded violently. She thought of her father on their porch in Arizona. "You don't fight the environment," he had told her. "You read it. You have a conversation with it." She stopped fighting the cold. She stopped fighting the mountain. She mapped the wind's rotation, timing the brief, fleeting span when the crosswind died down. She waited for the perfect lull. She breathed out. She pulled the trigger. A prolonged moment passed. Then the precise, deadly fire from the far mountains ceased entirely. The valley fell into an exhausted, hollow silence. Overwatch to actual. She keyed her radio, her voice remarkably steady. 5th position cleared. You can move. As she packed her gear, her secondary receiver, her piece of classified tech she had secretly carried for years, flared to life. A transmission was broadcasting on the insurgent frequency, but it wasn't coming from the mountains. It was coming from the valley floor. The network's head wasn't the dead sniper on the peak. The head was Caldwell, standing among the bleeding Marines, calling his handlers to report the failure. Part 7. The Reckoning. Sloane descended the mountain at record speed, heedless of the treacherous ice and loose rock. When she hit the valley floor, she sprinted toward the convoy. Thorne intercepted her, battered and bleeding from a head wound. "I need to know where Caldwell is," she demanded. Thorne grabbed her arm. "I know about the transmissions, Callahan. I've been building a case against him for weeks. I needed him to make a move to prove it." Sloane stared at him in disbelief. "You put this entire convoy in the valley to bait him." "I put the best sniper I could find on Overwatch," he countered fiercely. "I need you to stand down. Let the chain of command handle him." "He just sent a status report," she said coldly. "He's waiting for a response. When that response comes, my receiver will trace it directly to his handlers. We can burn the entire network." Thorne looked at her, realizing the staggering depth of her long game. "You planned this? For years?" "My father planned it," she replied. "I'm finishing it." She scrambled back up the rocks to establish a clear signal. For a long stretch, the receiver was silent as the storm began to close in. Then the screen lit up. The coordinates decoded seamlessly. The signal wasn't local. It was tracing back to a high-level intelligence compound in Islamabad, the exact compound mentioned in her father's classified file. She had them. Suddenly, Declan's voice cracked over the radio. Callahan Caldwell made the men watching him. "He's running. He's heading up the northern drainage channel." "Do not engage Hayes," she ordered, flying down the rock face. "Track and report only." She sprinted across the valley floor, cutting off Caldwell's escape route. Scaling a rock formation above the drainage channel, she looked through her scope. Caldwell was below her, frantic, trying to smash his radio. She had a clean shot. She could end it instantly. But a dead man couldn't testify. A dead man couldn't dismantle a network. "Put the radio down." Her voice echoed off the canyon walls. Caldwell froze. He slowly raised his hands, turning toward the sound of her voice, realizing with a sickening dread that she hadn't just been fighting the ambush. She had been hunting him. "My name is Sloane Callahan," she announced, her voice ringing with the absolute authority of a judge reading a final sentence. "My father was Gunnery Sergeant Daniel Callahan. He was killed because someone sold his route. You know exactly who that someone is. And soon you're going to tell us everything." Moments later, Declan arrived breathless and slapped zip ties onto Caldwell's wrists. Part 8. The Aftermath. The extraction helicopters fought through the raging blizzard. Sloane sat in the back of the vibrating bird, her rifle across her lap. Caldwell securely chained to the floor across from her. She didn't look at him. The consuming fire that had fueled her for nearly a decade had vanished, replaced by a profound, echoing quiet. The machine had finally finished the task it was built for. Back at the base, the procedural nightmare began. Endless debriefings, statements, and interrogations by CID agent Vargas. Through it all, Sloane remained steadfast, handing over every piece of unauthorized evidence she had meticulously gathered. Late that night, Thorne found her staring blankly at a wall, holding a cold cup of coffee. "The Islamabad coordinates," Thorne said quietly. They verified the facility. They're moving on it tonight. The network is coming down. Your case will hold. He looked at her with deep reverence. You saved this convoy today, Callahan. I'm putting you in for multiple commendations. I don't want a commendation, she replied softly. I just want the families of the other men this network killed to get the same closure I got today. Back in her quarters, Sloane pulled the photograph of her father from her jacket. She looked at his proud, serious face. For so long, his loss had felt like a lack of gravity, a terrible freefall. But now the debt was paid. She had finally finished the sentence he had started. Declan knocked gently on her doorframe. The guys, Mercer and Adler, they wanted to apologize for following Caldwell, for not speaking up. Tell them they don't owe me an apology, she said firmly. Tell them they owe the wounded Marines in the infirmary. Tell them to do their laundry right to their families. Tell them to pay for it with action. Declan smiled faintly. That's your father talking. Yes, she agreed. It is. Months later, the Islamabad facility was dismantled. The traitorous network fell, and the records of the fallen, including Daniel Callahan, were honorably restored. Sloane accepted a formal reprimand for her unauthorized tech, followed immediately by a promotion. She requested a transfer to a training role. Standing before her first class of young, eager Marines, she taught them the discipline of stillness. She taught them what her father had taught her on a sun-drenched porch in Arizona. The battlefield does not care about your reputation, she told them, her voice echoing across the training ground. It only cares whether you have done the quiet, grueling work when no one was watching. Be worthy of the moment before the moment arrives. She paused, looking out at the horizon. Now pick up your rifles. The mountains are waiting.